Yeah, overall, I want to first of all say thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for putting this on as well. This is very much needed, especially in terms of connecting all these different HBCUs to the organizers, because I feel like it's very much I don't even want to say compartmentalized, unfortunately, but I think with the whole trends of like, kind of performative activism, it becomes like every HBCU has its own little like sect or little, its own sector of activism. So, I mean, I just have a couple of things to really talk about. Um, I won't bore y'all, but I guess in terms of what or who I am, my name is Zubin Abraham Ahmed. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a graduating political science senior from Morehouse College, minoring in, of course, leadership studies and criminal justice. So, also in terms of who I am, besides the whole Morehouse intro, which they drill into our heads during student orientation, I am an activist and an abolitionist. I very much am a socialist as well. And I'm really excited to be in this space. So, I guess in terms of kind of starting off of really the time that we find ourselves in. It's a strange time. I would say pretty damn surreal, especially in terms of all the things that have happened, but especially in terms of organizing at HBCU campuses. As we all know, whether it is from just the birth of neoliberalism, not to go too heavy on theory, but just there's been a lot of changes that have happened to our HBCUs, and there's also been a lot of things that we've tried to change at our HBCUs as well. And there's definitely a distinction to be made there. Whether it's the irony itself of our social justice debate tournament at Morehouse being held in our Bank of America auditorium that Bank of America donated to us with their big plaque up on the wall behind us where the pictures were taken. I think there's always kind of a sense of irony when one attends an HBCU, when one looks at the realities of the world, and when one also tries to organize at said HBCU. It's certainly an uphill battle. So, in terms of the time that we find ourselves at, especially as organizers and activists, I think there's now more than ever that kind of ever present question of how. I think we all know what our goals are. I think we all know whether it's, establishing certain social welfare nets, for example, or even just having the personal goals of I want to lead a movement or whatever it may be. There's always that question of how. And especially now, especially with terms of kind of reformist and accommodationist culture at HBCUs that I wouldn't even want to say reflect the wider world, but almost have become its own subset of reflection of the entire world. I think it becomes harder than ever. Um, Obviously, the past speaks for itself. There has been many trials and tribulations that activists have had to face, persecution, absolute suppression, repression, whatever it may be, whether it's COINTELPRO or literal slave patrols. There's a whole legacy and continuing legacies of oppression that follow activists and just follow people in general. But the fact of the matter is, I think what I see, especially at Morehouse and at HBCUs in general, is kind of a wave of complacency. So, what do I really mean when it comes to complacency? I'm glad you asked said rhetorical question, in your mind at least, because what I mean by that is really kind of a much ado about nothing scenario where it seems like everything's fixed because maybe de jure, for example, by law, certain things are knocked off, like, segregation is illegal de jure, but de facto, it's still very much in our school systems, be it along public school systems or maybe even return back to the 1960s segregation academies. But we still find ourselves with this complacency as HBCU organizers. And I think we all encounter that every time we introduce our organization at whether it's an RSO, like registered student organization fair, or whether it's literally just on the street of like the community that our actual schools are in. So for Morehouse, the West End of Atlanta, where there's a hard boundary in between our campus and said community. So every time maybe we introduce ourselves, introduce the Maroon Party, for example, we always kind of get this reaction of like, but why do we need that? Why do we need, socialism, for example, or why do we need to, abolish the police, for example, or why do we need to stop Cop City from being constructed in Atlanta? And that's very much something that we aim to fight. Not fighting necessarily even react itself or the question itself. But I think really the culture that has kind of I'll say germinated from. So, especially in terms of what that looks like for us. So, me, I am one of the main founders and the primary leaders of the Maroon Party. We are an Afro socialist Black nationalist organization on campus. We went through a couple name changes, but settled on the Maroon Party as name one because our Morehouse school colors are obviously maroon's one of them, but also because of the legacy and I would say absolute just the legends, not to sound corny, but like the history behind the maroon people as a whole, of just literally coining its own kind of verb of maroonage, absolutely just leaving, leaving and establishing autonomy and sovereignty well before any ideals of dual power, for example. So when we actually, and yeah, thank you for that link. When we actually look at who we are as an organization, we very much are trying to establish that. But that does also mean we come into some clashes with whether it's the admin, the administration on our campus, or whether it's a large amount of the business majors on our campus, unfortunately, or a large amount of kind of students who have fed into a lot of this neoliberal model. And that specifically looks like, just not engaging. I think, especially with HBCU organizers, we have a problem in terms of not getting a lot of people to engage. Sure, there's always going to be the idealistic notions of, oh, if we, start something or want to fight something, people are going to join up. But actually, prefaced by some research I've been doing for my senior thesis, the fact of the matter is we aren't really seeing that on the same level as we saw before. So, for example, taking a look at kind of a vanguard party being the Black Panther Party, they were able to become such a catalyst for change in a certain sense and radical change, transgressing the actual status quo or even the concept of the political, hailing from Cedric Robinson. But in terms of them, this context that they found themselves in was very much similar, but also different at the same time. What we saw was the context of an anti-imperialist movement on the world scale, but also, I think kind of no actual wave of complacency in the same sense. Of course, there's a paradigm shift that we must have to actually take in terms of how we view these from the perspectives that we stand at now. But there were wide sentiments of anti-imperialism, especially among like non-Black people who were allies at the time and able to ally with the movement. So, for example, draft dodgers from the Vietnam War, and also just the Black Panther parties kind of forming the coalition and also just collaboration with anti-imperialist governments. That is wild. Imagine an actual vanguard party, maybe even from an HBCU, for example, collaborating with an anti-imperialist government. That would be unprecedented, but the fact of the matter is that's very much happened before. But I think what we still come back to as HBCU organizers is still that whole idea of, but we have generational wealth. But what about Jay-Z and Rock Nation? I like Jay-Z as a rapper, but Rock Nation, But the point is, we still can't really fight these uphill battles with the status quo, with the establishment, quote unquote. And we see that in the extensions of what that establishment is, whether it's the carceral state, whether it's mass incarceration just as the tip of the iceberg, or whether it's the mechanisms of the police state that literally mechanize, the actual legitimization of what a state is, whether it's Max Weber's definition of the monopoly of a geographically bound entity with a monopoly on violence. The fact of the matter is, we still come up against those walls where we say, oh, we made some marginal change. Okay, yes, we went out into the West End and we passed out some food and whatnot for mutual aid. Or, yeah, we engaged in political education to educate people on why Stop Cop City is bad. But the fact of the matter is, we still find ourselves at these roadblocks, especially as HBCU organizers, which is why, as I kind of come to my last minute, I'm really, really excited that we're forming, I would say, just contacts and connections as well to kind of build a broader coalition as HBCU organizers. Because to me, it's not really a matter of like, damn, like, can we do it? It's more of a matter of like, damn, we have to do it because nobody else is gonna. I think that's very much been shown through the political system, through the electoral system, and also even the student electoral system of our HBCUs, unfortunately, through SGA, for example. But once again, as I come to my last like 15 seconds, I want to say I'm really happy to be here. I'm really excited to hear everybody else speak and just to hear everybody's perspectives as well of what it means to be an HBCU organizer and what it means to try to organize for change, especially today. So thank you again.